with Purse Strings. As many of you know, we come to you every Monday and we talk about all things financial for women. And today we have Taryn Fisher. I will introduce you, but I'd like to just start by saying Purse Strings provides free online tools and resources for women so that they can make smart financial decisions for themselves and for their families. We built purse strings because women were an overlooked market. They continue to be an overlooked market in lots of different financial arenas. So we want women, first of all, come to the table, learn what you need to know to make smart financial decisions at any point in your life for yourself and for your family. All of our resources on our Purse Strings website are free. And then we have this amazing, what we call our top tier Rolodex of financial experts, all things financial. They're available for hire resources. There's attorneys, lenders, realtors, coaches, all sorts of professionals who can serve women at any point in time when they need to make a financial decision or they're going through a transition in their life. It's going to impact them financially. Come to pursestrings.co and look for the financial professionals that are in your area and have an interview with them, have a conversation with them. You can just one click out to their site or to their scheduler and meet them. So today we have Taryn Fisher. She's an attorney with Sage Counsel, and our topic today is what I like to call the gray divorce. We've officially called it Securing Your Future in the Later Life Divorce. And before we got started, I was asking Tara a lot of questions about this, like, is this happening now more prevalently, or we just not heard about it before? But before we go down that road, Taryn, take a few minutes and introduce yourself.
I'm happy to do so. First of all, I just want to thank you, Dr. Barb and Maggie and Purse Strings, this great community that is so near and dear to my heart. I focus my practice as much as possible on upholding and uplifting women professionals and women clients. And this is such an important resource. So I'm so proud to be a part of it. My name is Taryn Fisher. I am an attorney. I practice primarily in family law, which means divorce, pre and post judgment issues. I do some adoption, and then I do estate planning as well. But I'd say 80 to 90% of my practice is focused on issues that arise in the dissolution of marriage process. I'm an Illinois practitioner, so I'm licensed to practice in Illinois. And most of what I talk about today will be based on how things work in Illinois, though a lot of what we'll cover can extend beyond Illinois. I strongly urge and will continue to urge that if you have a specific question about how the law works in your state, if you're outside of Illinois, to reach out to a professional. And as Barb said, there's an awesome list of professionals who are purse string approved. So, and in addition to being a litigator, I'm also a mediator, and I practice in alternative dispute resolution, which means my practice focuses as much as possible on settlement, whether that's through mediation, whether that's through something called collaborative divorce, which is when all of the parties agree that they don't want to litigate, and they hire professionals who also agree to keep the matter out of court. So we sit down at a round table with additional professionals who are trained collaboratively, like a financial planner, therapists, coaches, and anything else, any other professional might be appropriate to find resolution. So that's a little bit about my practice. As Dr. Barb mentioned, there actually is an increase in women seeking divorce. And again, I'm going to focus on women because that's what our group does. But there has been an increase in women seeking divorce in later age. And even just generationally, the baby boomer and Generation X generations, we've seen an increase in divorces from those two generational groups over the last 20 years. So it's absolutely a crucial and important topic to be discussing right now. And on a side note, COVID has actually, we've seen an increase in divorce just from COVID. And we won't expand on that right now. But as you can imagine, being stuck in a house, sometimes the the stress and tensions that have been bubbling underneath are all coming to a head
Yeah.
because of the stress of COVID.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Taryn, for being here and sharing your expertise. We have a few questions we'd just like to tee up for you. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to chime in, put them in the chat box. But first of all, what would you define as a gray divorce or later in life divorce? How would you define that?
That's a great question. I hate to put an age on it, but let's focus more on the topics that are applicable and the topics that the court will need
Mhm.
you to settle in order to receive a dissolution of marriage.
Okay.
So when we're talking about gray divorces, we're talking about perhaps people who've already raised their children, where the
Mhm.
focus is less on parenting time and responsibilities and more on a division of assets and on self-support. And
Mhm.
how are we going to move forward with two separate households, two separate lives, while being able to be financially stable and secure.
Mhm. Right, right, right. And then let's talk about assets.
Mhm.
So I know there's been a term of marital assets and non-marital assets. Can you explain what that means and how you divide those?
Absolutely. So, and before I even answer your question, what I want to say is when you're getting a divorce, you're basically in a sense winding down a business. So
Mm.
what the court wants to see, I mean, it's the most emotional, personal experience, and yet your lawyer is likely going to be approaching it the way I just described. We're going to be evaluating what is of value,
Mhm,
um, what are the assets and what are the debts,
mhm,
and what of those two categories are subject to division between the parties?
mhm,
So when you say what is marital and what is non-marital, that's kind of the key, the crux of a whole divorce when we're talking about assets is determining what assets are subject to being divided between the two parties, and those are the marital assets.
mhm,
So we have a pot that's marital, and then we have another pot that is non-marital.
mhm,
So non-marital assets are assets that you might have come to the marriage with, assets
mhm,
you earned or received before the marriage and are bringing with you.
mhm,
Marital assets are considered any assets that are earned or received during the course of the marriage, with very few exceptions. Okay, so some exceptions are if you were directly gifted something to you individually, not to the marriage, then
mhm,
that would be considered a non-marital asset and it would not be subject to division
mhm,
between you and your spouse. Um, if you had an inheritance, that would be
mhm,
similar, or a trust that was
mhm,
established and you're the beneficiary, not you and your spouse.
mhm,
Those would be considered non-marital assets that you keep for yourself. What I do want to mention, though, is Illinois is a state that approaches the division of assets in something that, in a way that a method that we call equitable distribution.
mhm.
That means we're not necessarily dividing 50-50.
Mm.
We're
Okay.
looking at the parties, and I can go through some details in a little bit, but we're looking at the parties, what they each have access to, and that means those non-marital assets can be taken into consideration. So if I have a trust that was established on for me,
Mhm,
it's not my husband can't get his hands in it if we were to divorce,
mhm,
but the court might say, Taryn, you have access to this uh, quite a bit of money, and that in that sense we might allocate more of the
uh,
marital assets to your husband,
got it,
or we might consider your access to the trust assets when we're talking about maintenance, spousal support, alimony.
got it, got it.
So that's what equitable distribution means. Other states have an approach that's called communal, okay? And I'm not going to talk too much about community property because it's not how I practice and I am not an expert in that field. But what I
Mhm,
can tell you about community property is when you live in a communal property state, the marital assets are divided 50-50. So
Mhm.
rather than an equitable distribution where we're taking into consideration a bunch of other factors,
Mhm.
we're 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 adding up the marital estate, the marital assets, and it's equal to each partner.
Mhm.
All property acquired by either spouse during the marriage is subject to that marital distribution in a community property state.
Got it.
So real quickly, those I can tell you, I believe right now the states that are community property, not equitable distribution, are Arizona, California, Idaho, Louisiana, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, Washington, and Wisconsin. So
Mhm.
if your state is listed, you're going to want to take that into consideration,
Mhm.
talk to a planner, think about the impact. And what that also doesn't just mean protecting yourself if you have concerns about your own financial stability, but it also means if you do have some non-marital assets or are anticipating, um, uh, to be a beneficiary of a trust or inheritance, keep
Mhm.
that in mind.
Yeah.
How depending on your state, how that might affect your dissolution process.
Good point. Very good point. Well, let's talk about maintenance or spousal support. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that? Like, who gets it and how they determine what that amount is?
Absolutely. So, and again, speaking from the perspective of an Illinois practitioner, I can say that some of the Illinois statute echoes throughout the country what a court is going to be looking towards. So, when you're getting a divorce, you and your spouse are always welcome to try to resolve or reach terms of settlement without the court getting involved. But
Mhm.
at the end of the day, when you step up to the bench and the judge is going to issue a divorce decree or judgment for you, the judge first wants to review the terms and wants to
Mhm.
make sure that they're equitable and fair. So a
Mhm.
lopsided agreement that the court is not going to approve.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about both the allocation of assets and then maintenance. So
Mhm.
the term we use now is maintenance. The more familiar term might be alimony or spousal support.
Right.
And what that is payment from typically the higher wage earner
Mhm.
to the spouse who's asking for or seeking financial support.
Mhm.
Um, and that's determined. Basically, the purpose of maintenance is to make sure that both parties can proceed in their new lives
Yeah.
with the status quo of the history and lifestyle of the marriage. So as
Mhm.
close to that as we can get. Now, obviously, with divorce comes change, and
Right.
it's unlikely that your life will continue exactly how it was before. But the goal is to be fair to both parties as much as possible, equitable, and
Mhm.
to achieve the sort of the standard of living that you became accustomed to during your marriage.
Right.
So the first question the court is going to ask and what your attorney is going to want to talk about with you is this even a maintenance case? Is it
Mm.
appropriate? And when we're looking at is it appropriate, we're going to be asking a couple questions. We're going to be talking about what are both parties' incomes?
Mhm.
Are you as the person seeking maintenance already able to support yourself? Do you have a job that is a good job that you could live off of the income and kind of get yourself close to the status that or lifestyle that you've already been accustomed to? Then
Mhm.
that might not be a maintenance case, even if your partner, your spouse earns more than you.
Yeah.
What are your needs? Do you have
Yeah.
specific needs, medical needs, healthcare needs? What's your earning capacity, both
Mhm.
right now and in the future?
Mhm.
What kind of contribution did you make to the family and to
Yeah.
the household? And are there any impairments on either of you, including the spouse who we are seeking to pay maintenance? Does that spouse have a potential impairment that might impact or inhibit his or her ability to earn
Mm.
money down the line. Another thing that the court asks and that we would be asking is how much time would be necessary if the person is able to let's say you as let's say you aren't in a position to earn money. Let's say
Mhm.
you chose to stay home and maintain the household and raise children.
Yeah.
um, would it be possible for you, and how much time would it take for you
Mhm.
to obtain education or
Right.
training and
Mhm.
subsequent employment? Is that
Right.
even a possibility? And so since we're focused on a gray divorce today, if you were my client and let's say you are in your mid 50s or older,
Mhm.
I might say, listen, it's going to be very difficult at this point in life to secure, to go back to school, to afford going back to school, to be trained. And perhaps, we're setting a bar or a limit at a maximum potential
Mhm.
earning capacity.
Mhm.
As I mentioned, we're going to be considering the standard of living.
Yeah.
So even if you are employed, let's say you're a school teacher and you're earning $50,000 a year, but your partner, your spouse, earns substantially higher amounts, and that contributed to a more lavish lifestyle. The
Yeah.
court will consider that. So just
Yeah.
because you can afford a one-bedroom apartment doesn't mean you're not entitled to maintenance.
Right. Interesting.
And then we're also taking into consideration the length of the marriage, how long
Okay.
were you married, as well as your age and your physical condition and your emotional condition. The
Mhm.
court finally is going to look at, did you already have an agreement? So if you entered into a prenuptial agreement,
Got it.
either a prenup or a postnup,
Mhm.
that's going to be considered.
Mhm.
And again, any other things that the court might deem just or fair, the court
Yeah.
has the discretion. So if there's a special circumstance, have confidence in discussing that with your practitioner, with your legal representation.
Wow. There's a lot that they consider. Every situation is different. So you really
That's
need
right.
to come to the table, have a really good attorney who's going to really ask all these questions and vet out what is your particular situation in this matter. So that's
Exactly. And that
interesting.
again, and you're going to hear me say this throughout our conversation today, it is so important, even if you think you have it under control, you know everything you need to divide, and sometimes when it comes to divorce, there's an anxiety about even
Yeah,
reaching out to an attorney.
sure.
But I really strongly encourage everybody to talk to professionals, and not just attorneys, but CPAs,
Hmm.
appraisers, financial planners. There are a wealth of people
Yeah.
out there who can help give you direction, but also might fill in some gaps. You
Hmm.
might think you know the answer, and you might be misinterpreting or not understanding or missing something.
Yeah, exactly. And there's the certification, the CDFA, which is also another good certification, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. So there's a lot of professionals who come to the table. Like we say, it's never just one person, it's never just your attorney, but there are a team of experts that should be kind of at your fingertips to
Yeah,
ask these questions of. So excellent. And
absolutely.
then let me talk about all those other kind of things that come into play, like retirement accounts and
Mhm.
pension and Social Security. When you're talking about a gray divorce, all those are starting to be more come to light, right? Because those are
Exactly.
retirement is an age where you take advantage of those resources that you've been saving and contributing to with all of this time within the marriage. So, how do those play a role?
Sure. So, and I'm going to go over a little bit about each of those areas,
Okay.
because we could do a whole
Yeah,
conversation, a whole separate session on each of those
sure.
categories. But let me just start off by saying, generally speaking, retirement, pension, deferred comp, and when I say retirement, I mean 401k,
Hmm.
IRA.
Hmm.
These retirement assets are typically considered marital assets and therefore subject to allocation or division. So even if you don't, if you think your partner, your spouse has a retirement account, you're not sure about how much is in there,
Hmm.
or it's titled just in his name, so he told me it's not mine, or
Hmm.
it's it's just for him. not necessarily true.
Okay, good to
So
know.
if your retirement was earned during the marriage, it is absolutely considered a marital asset subject
Mhm.
to allocation. And I'll add, sometimes I hear the question, well, my spouse didn't actually contribute to it. It was only the employer, it was 100% built upon what the employer contributed.
Yeah.
Still considered a marital asset, still subject to allocation and distribution or division in a divorce,
Yeah,
okay?
I can see that happening a lot, especially if you're a stay-at-home mom where you're managing the household and raising
Yep,
children and you're not having the opportunity to contribute to, your retirement funding in that way, would be unfair not to really
exactly.
have some of those monies for your own retirement. So that's really good to know.
Yeah, Dr. Barb, you're hitting on something really crucial. And I think when we started this discussion, one of the things I really wanted to point out is in my practice, I actually, you might be surprised to hear, have maybe more clients who are going for this gray divorce than younger clients
Wow.
who are, and part of that reason is they've waited and waited
Yeah.
out of an anxiety of, I stayed home. I managed the household.
Yes.
He managed the assets and the bills. I don't really know.
Yes.
And I have no savings of my own. And he
Yes.
said, I can't survive without him. And I'm getting nothing. So a lot of women finally have put themselves in a position of discomfort. And that's a mild way of putting
Yeah.
it. If you're listening today and this is applicable to you, you know what I'm talking about.
It's
Um,
financial abuse. Let's
yes,
call it what
and
it
if
is.
we discuss, and I'd love to talk about more.
Yeah.
Um, you please talk to a practitioner because that anxiety and fear, we're here to
Mhm.
address and answer the questions so you know you have options.
Right.
Um, and really, let's circle back to discuss the discussion of how to approach a retirement
Mhm.
asset, including a pension. The devil is really going to be in the details here. So let's say you have, well, to begin, let's say you don't really know what is out there.
Right.
When you're seeking a dissolution of marriage, both parties have an obligation to fully disclose all of their assets and all of their debts. So when you get an attorney, that attorney will do it for you. They'll take the steps
Mhm.
to find out, and ideally your spouse will also retain counsel. And
Mhm.
whether it's a friendly divorce, like I mentioned, a collaborative divorce,
Mhm.
or through mediation or otherwise, the lawyers will talk and they will do a formal exchange. And
Mhm.
then we're going to look at what is out there. So once we see what's out there, the next step, and this is for all assets, the
Mhm.
next step is, let's identify and categorize what's marital and what's non-marital. And
Mhm.
once we've done that, we can then put a value on each of the assets and then proceed with that step of what's equitable and fair.
Mhm.
So are we doing maintenance? And after we talk about retirement, I'd love to briefly circle back to the maintenance and how it's calculated and how long you can
Yes.
anticipate. But
Yes.
but let's just say we're talking about retirement assets. Let's say both spouses have retirement assets. But let's say one spouse, let's say husband has a Roth IRA and wife has a 401k from her employment, and they're substantially the same. Let's say they're both $100,000. And let's say, and this is why I say get a practitioner involved.
Mhm.
Let's say the two partners, the married couple, have a discussion and say, you know what, I'll just keep mine and you keep yours. That
Mhm.
seems fair. And we don't need to get professionals involved.
Mhm.
Well, don't forget that a Roth IRA has a different tax implication than a
Mhm.
401k. So actually, you might be walking away with something of lesser value if you as the wife keep your 401k and don't pursue any of the Roth,
Excellent point.
or some other asset somewhere else. So let's
Right.
say your practitioner can properly evaluate what would the post-tax value of your 401k be?
Right.
Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to dividing retirement assets is, let's say just husband had $100,000 401k, and
Mhm.
the husband and wife decide we're going to split it 50-50 and we'll each take $50,000.
Mhm.
Well, but we made that decision, let's say January 1, and we get
Mhm.
the dissolution of marriage isn't finalized till the end of the year, and the dissolution agreement states $50,000. Well, wife
Mhm.
is going to get $50,000, but because of the volatility of the market, we don't know if that remains in the intention of a 50-50 split.
Right.
The 401k might have increased in value, wherein the wife might have been entitled to some more assets, or alternatively, it might have decreased and the husband is losing out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So always make sure you're keeping that in mind. Adjust, adjust for gains and losses. And
Mhm.
actually, what I specifically would recommend is having the language in your settlement agreement very crisp and clear. And that's why a lawyer is so
Yeah.
important when you're getting a divorce.
Yeah.
Make sure that the language addresses gains and losses, so
Mhm.
that we're not leaving any assets on the table. When you are dividing retirement accounts, there's the way to really do it is through something called a qualified domestic relation order.
Mhm.
It's a separate order that's going to accompany your divorce documents,
Mhm.
and that makes sure that it's done the right way. It gives direction to the asset manager, and it also is going to assure that it's not a taxable event to either parties.
Got it. Interesting. Whew, it's a lot. It's a
It
lot.
is
That's why
a
you need the
lot.
professionals. Yeah.
It
I want to
is.
circle back to oh, Social Security.
Sure. Social Security is a lot too, and pension as well. Just
Yeah.
briefly on pension briefly, pension, just as any other retirement asset, is subject to division.
Mhm.
It's the portion that was accumulated during the marriage.
Mhm.
And that's the same with the any retirement assets. So if one of the parties accumulated retirement assets prior to the marriage, we a professional should be involved to decide what of the retirement and what of its income that was generated from it was marital. But
Got
when it
it.
comes to pensions, the valuation is not always straightforward and simple. It really the to be able to put a value on the pension, it relies on understanding what the future payout plan looks like.
Yeah.
And there's a variety of different methods, and that's not for today to discuss. And frankly, I farm that part of my agreement out because there are lawyers who specify just in that topic.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I would partner with somebody. But again, if you're looking at an equitable distribution of pension funds, you can approach it in a couple different ways. You could get a valuation on what the
Mhm.
pension value would be, and then
Mhm.
do an equitable distribution with a buyout of other assets.
Mhm.
Or you can divide it just the way I was talking about
Mm.
the other assets with a qualified domestic relations order.
Got it.
The pitfall with doing an asset buyout, an exchange, like I'll
Yeah.
just keep the whole house,
Yeah.
is if there was a change in just like anything else, if
Yeah.
there's a change in the value, you might not be able to recover. You can't really
Yeah.
recover the loss. What you've agreed to is what you've agreed to.
Got it.
So
And then Social Security.
Social Security is interesting. So divorce, so like I was mentioning before, there is a trend that's suggesting an increase of proportions of women will be divorced when they reach retirement age.
Mm.
So it's truly important to understand, at least on a basic level, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now, very briefly, what you are entitled to when it comes to Social Security. So, depending on your circumstances, a divorced woman can anticipate receiving either retired worker benefits that are based on her own covered Social Security covered earnings,
Mhm.
or auxiliary benefits, which would be
Mhm.
based on either a living or deceased former spouse
Got
of
it.
their covered earnings.
As
So
long as they're not remarried, right?
you would think that, but no,
Oh,
you are entitled to your spouse's so essentially what would happen is if let's say you were never employed, so
okay.
you don't have any social security, you didn't pay into it, and you're not entitled to your own retired worker benefits, okay?
Mhm.
Then you are entitled to a calculation or an evaluation of what your spouse, what their social security would have been for their primary insurance amount. If your ex-spouse is still alive,
Mhm.
the calculation would be you're entitled to what would equate to one half, 50% of their primary insured amount. If that spouse has passed away, you're entitled to the full amount.
Oh, okay.
Regardless of that other spouse, of your ex-spouse's marital status,
Got it.
you are entitled to that amount. You also, let's say you had a prior marriage, if you had multiple spouses throughout your life, your social security kind of has this option where you can't get all of them, but
Right.
you can receive the best case scenario.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, to put it as simply as possible, you're entitled to the highest payout, whether that's if you were in the workforce and are eligible to Social Security
Mhm.
on your own income, and it was more than what your spouse was entitled to, then you
Mhm.
would go with that number. One thing I did not say is if your marriage is less than 10 years, then you are not entitled to
Okay. So
your
10 years
spouse.
is a
10
important
years,
number.
big important number, yes. But essentially you can you would pick whether it's your number, whether if that 50 if your ex-spouse is still alive and 50% of his payout would be more than what you would be eligible for, then go
Mhm.
for that 50%.
Got it. Got it. Well, let's just wrap up a little bit here. I know you had some calculations that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, I because maintenance is such a kind of a big question mark, and I thought it would be helpful to just talk briefly about
Yeah.
how it's calculated. And
Sure.
I'm going to
Yeah.
just really talk about Illinois, but I did send over a visual because there's I mean, I have thrown so much out there
Yeah.
already, you know,
But this is
but
important.
this is important. So in Illinois, the way that we do a guideline statutory calculation, meaning the statute provides direction. It provides essentially, in the simplest terms, an equation. And
Okay.
that equation is the essentially if you're receiving maintenance from your spouse, that annual amount would be 33.33% of your spouse's net income subtracting 25% of your income. And that total number is not to exceed 40% of your combined net incomes. So the example I've provided here is, let's say, hold on, I need to maximize my screen so I can see. So let's say husband Henry, earns
Mhm.
$200,000 annually.
Mhm.
Wife Wanda earns $40,000 annually. You can
Mhm.
see the 33% of the 200,000 is $66,660. And
Mhm.
then the 25% of Wanda's annual income is of net income is 10 grand. And
Got it.
so we're settling on an annual amount of support of 56,000 and change, or a little over $4,000 monthly. And as you can
Yeah.
see below, I just checked the math to make sure that it's not surpassing. So that is a very simple, quick, and there are other factors that would come into play, but that's kind of the bottom line, how the guideline support in Illinois.
Okay.
And many states have substantially similar calculation approaches, a base percentage, less a base percentage of one spouse's income from the others.
Got it.
Now, the other factor that we're looking at when we're talking about maintenance is how long, what is the
Mm.
duration?
Yeah.
So just because you've been married for a year doesn't mean you're entitled to ongoing support for the rest of your life. But
Mhm.
since we're talking about gray marriages, gray divorces, a lot of the folks listening in are looking at long-term marriages, 20
Yeah.
plus years, right? Now in Illinois, if you've been married for more than 20 years or 20 years or more, you're entitled to something called indefinite
Mhm.
maintenance. So either it's at the court's discretion. So it's either for the amount of years of the marriage. So if you were married 25 years, you're entitled to 25 years of support,
Mhm.
or indefinitely. The court
Mhm.
might say more, or might say ongoing until a change of circumstances occurs.
Mhm.
So know that there are these options, and know that you might feel overwhelmed and confused, and I don't know what assets I have access to, or I'm a teacher and I only earn X amount. Know that that most courts in most states have statutes in place to make sure that you're not left inequitably out of
Right.
luck, so to speak.
Right. Well, you have given amazing information today, Taryn. Very thorough, very specific. I know it has to do with Illinois law, but nonetheless, great information for women to consider when they're going through this great divorce, which, like you say, we're seeing more and more every day. So,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for bringing this forward to us. This is important. And unfortunately, we will be talking about divorce more and more often because it's a confusing and very emotional time. And we just want to make sure women, before they make any decisions, have all the information they need. They're well informed. So, this is Barb Provo with Purse Strings, and we can highly recommend Taryn Fisher, as you can see, from Sage Counsel. You can contact her at, let's see, Fisher at sagecounsel.com.
It's actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to correct it. It's Fisher at sagecounsel.law, LAW.
Law. Well, that makes
Mhm.
sense. Law. You can also find Taryn through our website, purstrings.co. Look for an attorney or look for Taryn by her name. Her profile will come up, and you can go ahead and contact her directly through our site as well. So, thanks again, Taryn, for coming on today and sharing your wisdom. Now, every woman out there knows that they have this excellent resource at their fingertips, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barb, and thanks to everybody listening in. Have a great holiday season.
You too, Taryn. Bye, everyone.